as applied to business was just something that freaked them out. That was not
Uh,
not business appropriate. Morning, Mark. Um, so we're gonna just embrace it today anyway.
yeah.
I'm super pleased to see you all here. For those of you who are not entirely sure where you are or what is happening, this morning we are talking about designing meeting rituals. So rituals in business that are for use in meetings, and just a couple of standard tips. If you are in the call and want to play, go ahead and stay present. We're going to give you some things to do and things to look at as we go. Video on is always welcome, not required, but you will have chances to work together. So being able to see each other will be amazing for that. Chat away as long as it's on topic, and take some notes. This particular session today, we're scheduled for 90 minutes. And as many of you know, we are keen on practicing, we are keen on experimenting. So our purpose here is to explore how and why teams would design specialized meeting rituals. We have a whole bunch of stuff we intend to get to at the end. In this case, both Norman and I have dealt with this material before in our private programs, and we approach it very differently. So I have a very much, here are some examples and 1, 2, 3, 4 steps about how to do it kind of approach, which is practical and useful, but often leaves folks going, well, wait a second, why? Right? What is the larger context? What's the purpose? Norman has got the larger why nailed. So we thought, wouldn't it be fascinating to see if we actually explore both of those parts of the puzzle in the same session? We have never done this before, so we shall see if that's fascinating. And at the end, we will ask you all for your feedback. And we've prepared a number of resources to go along with this course. We don't really feel like sharing our screens today. We want everybody to be able to explore this on your own. So as we go through them each, I've got a number of PDFs. The links are in the chat. And as we get to each one, we'll let you know which one we're on, and we'll pull those links in again. So the very, very first question I want to explore with you all today is, when in your work have you encountered times where you have been part of a program that was around one of these initiatives? And I'm going to name a number of initiatives. And if your camera is on, then you can just raise your hand. And if it's not, you can throw it into the chat. But how many of you have been part of an organization that was doing a diversity, equity, or inclusion initiative? Yeah, quite a number, right? How about lean manufacturing, so a lean processing initiative, or total quality management, or Six Sigma, or something like that? Yeah, okay, great.
Right. Yeah, any kind of process improvement kind of
Yeah.
thing.
How many people have been part of a group that decided it was going to become more innovative? We're going to take on more innovation. Yeah, awesome. All right. And how about agile? Anybody been through an agile or a design thinking transformation? Yeah, Mark. Mark Kilby's an agile coach. So he has been part of that times 29 million. All right. So there are times when those kinds of big value ideas, right? We're going to be innovative, we're going to be inclusive, we're going to be agile, work well. And there are a lot of times when they really, really don't. So to help start exploring, what might be going on there, let's turn it over to Norman. But before I do, final note, we are recording. So if there's anything that happens here today that you wish not to be seen or heard on, please hold back and don't share it. Because it's recorded, that's it. All right, Norman, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you, Lisa. And it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm just overjoyed to be able to explore with you some of the as Elise says, higher frameworks, if you will, or the frameworks that may help explain some of the details that you get involved in and why you get involved with them. So you've all been involved with some sort of initiative. Let's just call it a major change initiative: lean, inclusion, performance, innovation, process improvement initiative. Call that as some sort of a strategic initiative. What has been your experience with that? What's worked and what hasn't? Now, Elise told me the good way to do that so we can keep the time tight is just to have you call out a sentence or put some comments in the chat. But just let me ask, what were some of the things that worked and what was, I'm especially interested in what didn't work? Mark, you've been involved with a lot of Agile, you said.
Yeah, so I wasn't going to crowd the audio channel, but since you asked,
Yes.
one thing that I've seen that did work is communicating benefits and intentions of the change multiple times, multiple ways. One thing I've seen that doesn't work is not allowing any way for people to ask questions about that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great. I'm seeing a whole bunch of stuff in the chat. So no real buy-in from leadership, lots of efforts, little change, unclear structure, lost momentum and enthusiasm after a few meetings, under-resourced initiative, um,
Too broad. So
too
many
broad.
great. Mm-hmm.
Don't assume when change is mandatory that people will enthusiastically adopt it. Uh, as I point out in the slide deck, you can look at these things, and what I've done is I've looked at these and sort of categorized them. And if I look at some of them, like let me pick one here. Unclear goals or under-resourced. You can look at that as issues around what we do and how we do it, right? Um, what we're supposed to do is not clear. Who's supposed to do it's not clear. And so the initiative doesn't work. Other issues here are things like we don't get a chance to work together. We don't get a chance to ask questions with each other. You might look at that as how we interact with each other, problems around the interaction. And then other things are just why are we doing this? People don't understand why, right? Or the rules of how we're supposed to operate, or the underlying assumptions, or the belief that if we tell people this is what they're going to do and they have to do it, then they're just going to adopt it. And there's all sorts of dynamics that prevent that. If you look at slide 3 in the PowerPoint PDF that you have, you'll see that we have created a model based around categorizing those 3 things. And basically we say there's 3, we call them fields of interest or fields of energy. And first is the activity, what we do and how we do it. Right? Those are the rules, the tasks, the details. And most initiatives lay that out. One of the things I hear a lot in Lean is or many of these initiatives, even Agile, I hear things like, it's all about what we do, but we don't have the Lean thinking or the Agile mindset, right? Mark's smiling. Yeah. And that has a lot to do with what we call the context field, the underlying mindset of something. And of course, there's always the relationship field, which is how we interact together. If I feel I'm in a group that supports me, that listens to me, that cares about me, I'm going to respond to the challenges that show up very differently than if I'm in a group that everybody's very defensive and protective and ego-based, right? So these three fields come together and it forms the heart of what I call the living organization model. And why I call it the living organization model or framework is because I actually began to observe that when people come together in a collective, as a group, as a team, the team actually operates as a single living entity. So if you go to slide 4 in the packet, you'll see what I mean. And what I've discovered is that I can apply the same rules to the collective that apply to the individual. In fact, the collective has its own persona. I was just talking with an individual just before this workshop, and we got into exploring the nature of the personality of the group and how the personality of the group affects the individual's behavior patterns. Now, I'm sure you each have some sort of experience where you find yourself joining a group, could be any group outside of work, inside of work, your community, your church, or wherever you hang out, your yoga community. And when you're with that group, you start to behave in accordance with that group's personality. I'm seeing people nodding their heads, yeah, right? And that explains this notion that the group itself has its own values, its own context, its own relationship rules, as well as what you do together as a group. And so we created this model based on it. And if you look at the next slide, slide 5 in the PDF deck, what I realized.
Hang on a second, Norman. We got some questions.
Oh, cool.
You're
Thank
dropping
you.
model bombs on folks, and couple questions like relationship context. What can you talk about that a little bit more and what's different about that?
Yeah, thank you, Elise. Mm-hmm. If you think of the behaviors you see us do, just group all of our behaviors. You can compare the behaviors in two things. One is behaviors oriented around doing something, writing a program, typing an order into the system. Right? So that's what we would call activity behavior. Then there's behaviors around interacting, relationships, how we talk to each other, how we listen, how we care about somebody, how we're critical or judgmental of somebody, right? So those are our behaviors associated with relationships. Context is the reason why we do all those things. It's our underlying beliefs, assumptions about how life works. Does that help clarify it? So one person will behave one way in a situation and respond to life's events based on their underlying context. My beliefs. And all of my beliefs are formed over the course of my life based on what I think will make me safe and successful. So that's the root cause of context.
Dave, you seem to have a question.
I did, and I was looking for the button that would raise my hand, so I think there's
the hand works.
That's a good button.
So anyway, hi, I'm Dave. I'm wondering, context sounds a little bit like how I've heard culture described. Are the two things the same or related?
Very, very, very related. The way I look at it is, culture, the classic definition of culture is the way we do things around here. And context is the why of culture. So it's enabling us to actually get underneath the way we do things around here and get to the why, so that in fact we can actually change the why. So we can actually change the culture. If you don't get down to that level, then you're just talking about again, changing the way we do things around here by trying to change the behaviors. And I'm going to come back to that in a little while, because that's going to be our lead into this notion of ritual. But before I do that, I want to actually have you guys explore this notion of activity, relationship, and context in a breakout. And so before I do that, I just want to check in to see are there any other questions that people have about this. Can you picture your daily activity or your daily interactions, and begin to understand that some of the things, some of the behaviors you do are activity based. Some of the things you do are relationship based. And underneath all of that is your core assumptions and beliefs and values. I mean, your deeper values, not your, we all respect and work together and those kinds of value statements. But the things that make you choose what you choose, and that everybody has their own sort of individual context.
Mark.
So Norman, I'll jump in. Thanks, Elise.
Yeah.
And you kind of answered this with your response to context, but this living being model that you're describing, this applies not just to well-functioning teams, but really to any team, even dysfunctional. Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
And the reason I began to assign what I call the personality type to the collective as a living being, because I've seen the dynamics of a collective influence individual behaviors. And I began to say, well, therefore, the collective itself has its own underlying context, and it has its own relationship patterns. And so one department in an organization might be, if you use a DISC instrument, a driver type department, and another might be a social type department, and they're more oriented around feelings, and somebody else is more oriented around tasks. So you can see you can apply to the department, the collective, the same attributes that you apply to an individual, which gives you a whole much more resources on how you deal with silos and other kind of challenges. So did that answer your question, Mark? Did that help?
Yep, that's great. Thanks.
Good.
I think maybe, Norman, if this is at all useful, an example. So if I look at your slide, which is power of context, Wolfe law, right? The outcomes and the activities and the relationship, and it's all like got this multiplier by context and whatnot. If we think about this particular event, right? This is an activity we're hosting where it's a free thing, it's open, come on in, we're going to talk deep meeting thoughts. Like, who on the planet gets random people from around the world to talk deep meeting thoughts with strangers? Well, we do, because the context in general is, hey, that's a cool thing to do. There's a belief set there, and there's enough activity to reinforce that context. And relationship wise, I have all of these cool people in my world, like you, who will come in and just talk about their cool living being thing with random people from around the world for free, right? Like that is how those things kind of work together in an event like this, and absolutely. Like for all of you. So
yep, absolutely. And the little equation is really meant to show that each of those elements have a different impact on the outcomes we create. Because context defines behaviors, both relationship and activity behaviors, it has a larger impact. If we can learn to work with the energy of our underlying beliefs and assumptions, both individually, but more importantly in organizations collectively, then you have a greater chance of achieving the outcomes you want, because you're aligning the underlying patterns of behaviors, the causal factors of the patterns of behaviors. You're addressing those so that you naturally respond the way you want to respond instead of fighting against it. So changing culture, and we get into this a lot in our workshop, changing culture, changing behavior patterns has a lot to do with changing context. And I'm going to talk about that in brief right after the breakout.
So it's a great time for a breakout, right?
Absolutely.
So here's the question, or the questions. We're going to give you 8 minutes in groups of about 3. And as we want you to connect back with that earlier conversation, right? So one of those big initiatives, and thinking about either the most recent one or your most memorable initiative, and the nature of the meetings you held in association with that initiative. One, what was the focus of those meetings? Was it all about the activities, right? What we explicitly are going to do? Was it about the relationships? How do I get Dave to do it, or Tom to do it, or Key to do it? Or was it about the beliefs in the context? And then finally, how might it have improved had you talked about in those meetings all 3 parts of that relational field, activity, energy field? Any questions about what's going to happen in these here breakouts?
The questions are in the slide deck. Also, the slide numbers 6, so you have them in front of you for reference.
All right, folks, enjoy your conversation. Oh, I have not put you guys in rooms, huh? Let's put you in some rooms. And let's see, Ksenia, you need to go to a room. Oh, no, you're not. You're just not joining. Got it. And Norman, let's move you in with these guys. Hi. Sorry. You're muted.
There I am.
I put you off in a room by yourself so you wouldn't have to be in a conversation.
Oh, it's okay.
You want to go into one? Here, go. I put you into a room with 2 other people. Go for it.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I have to join.
You do have to join it.
Okay.
Ksenia, I can't even tell if that's a first name or a last name or a whole combination of things. Stimulating conversation, huh? Welcome back. Y'all are muted. Feel free to unmute and just what did you hear there? Everybody else will be back in just a moment.
Hi, John.
Morning. Hey, Norman. Sorry I'm late.
Life
Life was very present this morning.
I know the feeling.
All right, folks. So welcome back. What were some of the that popped up from conversations for you?
At least your mic was breaking in and out. So the question was, what were some of the things that popped up for you during the conversation? John, you look like you want to say something. You're on mute.
There are several Johns, so I wasn't.
I apologize.
So it's a common issue for us, but
it is.
Well, it was a short time to try to conceptualize how this works in, but I find the structure to be very helpful in terms of rethinking some new challenges for groups I'm working with. I appreciate that. Thank you.
You're welcome. Mary says meetings go better when we pay attention to more than one aspect. That's the whole point. Yes.
Yeah, and Norman, I was going to add in our triad, we were noting the differences between large corporations, small startup, and university setting. So the different contexts and how that was.
Yeah, very true. The context of the organizational setting, as you say, those different things create a completely different energy pattern, a different context field associated with it, and that changes the way people think, operate, move, decide, make choices.
And I, if I can just say
And
something.
Nancy, yeah.
Yeah, thanks. So I do a lot of cross-cultural training, and I find that there are certain cultures, certain countries whose cultures generally focus much more on relationships up front and then back into the activities, and other cultures, notably Americans, who tend to focus on the checklist and the to-do list, and then maybe ease into relationships if everyone delivers things on time. So I always think of things with kind of a multicultural lens when I'm looking at some of these relationships.
Thank you for bringing that up, Nancy. That is so true, and that's just it really does change things. I find a lot of this work is more easily acceptable to people in Europe than it is to the U.S. We're finding a lot more interest in Europe because it's more relatable to the general orientation over there. Yeah, so that's great. Ali adds a comment which I thought was really interesting. When you focus just on the activity, it becomes unsustainable change, and that is so true, so true. And
which is a great
more.
segue. Yeah.
So if you look at the slide number 7.
Let's see. The title for that is "The Path to Our Current Outcome."
Yeah, thank you. What I discovered, and I kind of implied this earlier, was that the outcomes we get are clearly a function of the behaviors we do, both our activity behaviors and our relationship behaviors. But our behaviors are fundamentally an outgrowth of our context. We have created a context within ourselves. The company has its own context. Each department has its own context. And you can look at that as the underlying assumptions and rules of engagement for life, right? We associate, if something happens in our lives, we respond to it naturally out of context. We don't think about it. That's the good thing about context. It helps us be highly efficient in responding to life. The downside of it is when life changes, we need to change our context so that our behaviors, our natural behaviors, come about in a much more fluid way that responds to today's situation. There's a statement, if you go to the next slide, you'll see our methodology for changing an outcome. If you think about, you've all heard the statement, trying to get a different outcome by doing the same things over and over again is insanity, right? Everybody's heard that one. Well, just imagine if I have to change my behaviors to get a different outcome, which is totally true and represented in the slide. We have to go from current outcome to new outcome requires a change from current behaviors to new behaviors. But if my behaviors flow out of my context, expecting different behaviors while maintaining the same context is double insanity. So when we typically try to create change management work or change an outcome, we focus a lot on the behaviors. This is what you have to behave, but we pay very little attention to what the context is that needs to change. Here's the secret to changing context. Context is created by stories and rituals. Basically, your patterns of behaviors are ritualized. You get up in the morning and you have your daily ritual, and I know ritual has some negative connotation. I want to acknowledge those comments, and also you have your daily rituals. You have your daily home rituals. You have your daily work rituals. And they're all designed to make your life go smooth, efficient, operate nice. And everybody creates their own rituals. And organizations create their own rituals. And meetings have their own rituals. And so if you want to begin to change certain behavior patterns, you have to look at the underlying meaning behind it that's supported by the rituals you have. And that's the trick to changing context. Now, of course, this is just an introduction. There's a lot more to that. There's a whole methodology for doing it. But we're going to move over to Elise now, where she can talk about meeting, rituals specific to meeting, and how rituals can help support or enhance or change or modify the underlying context. So with that, I'll turn it back to Elise, and we'll talk about meetings, since this is a meeting. This is a meeting about meetings. So, Elise.
Boom. All right. So I put a link into my slides. My slides are mostly pictures, and I will promise to try and stay. I think there are big numbers in the top. So I am right on the first one. And this particular idea is not an idea that we've written a ton about, because when folks come to fix their meetings, right, most of the time they're looking to find ways to eliminate time, increase efficiency, and make sure that they get accountability. And that is all incredibly activity based, right? Well, what we have found when we were looking to do that is oftentimes you could tell people, yeah, make it 15 minutes shorter and have an agenda and all those things. And none of those changes ever work. It never sticks. So we're like, okay, well, what happens when folks who are successful, right? What are all of those patterns and habits of teams that actually meet really well? And after looking at that for about a decade, we put together this meeting performance maturity model, which is on our website. And it talks about all of the different things folks do as they go from being, hey, everybody run great meetings, okay, individualistic driven, to we as an organization run fabulous meetings. Everybody in the company will say that, and they are consistently effective. And one of the areas that we found, which was kind of a surprise, was this area of cultural ownership. So as organizations get more and more mature, they do specific things that make their meetings special. And there are a number of specific practices in that. Rituals are one of them. The first, though, and the easiest, is when you look at slide 2, is specialized naming, right? So you can go into an organization, back when you could go into organizations and you would look at the names on the conference walls. And the conference rooms would be conference room 1A, whatever, in organizations that are dead inside their souls. And in organizations that have a spirit, they are named after the planets from Star Wars, or philosophers, or, what is it, the numbers that are all unique that I can't remember the name of right now. John will fix that for me. And then the meetings themselves, prime numbers, there you go, right? So the meetings themselves get cool names. So there is a type of meeting that every organization has, which is called the team cadence meeting in general, which is this meeting that teams use to make sure that their work is staying on track and that they are solving problems in real time on a tactical basis. It's a very, very tactical, activity-based meeting. And yet, depending on which kind of organization you're in, that same exact meeting has a bazillion different names and a bazillion different variations on how you run it. So if you are one of Vern Harnish's Gazelle organizations, you run an adrenaline call. And if you are practicing open book management and the great game of business, you run a huddle. And if you're running the entrepreneur's operating system, you run a level 10. And if you are not just agile, but you're Scrum agile, you do a daily Scrum. And then you do a Scrum of Scrums. It's Scrum delicious as they get cooler and cooler up that chain. And in the military, they ran fusion cells. And I thought I was like, wow, that's cool. That's a work level sort of name. And then the roles themselves. So you get facilitator, timekeeper, note taker, but then you get names like monkey minder, which is a special name for the person in one of the organizations who writes down the action items, right? And Norm the enforcer, which is a role for the person who is in charge of enforcing the norms. Norm is gender neutral in this case. So So these are the ways in which they use naming to shift that context, right? And we all know the power of framing and names. Huge deal, huge deal. What you call a thing changes the way people react to it. And the other level, so moving on to the next one, slide 3, the next level of cultural ownership we see as performance criteria. So basically the overarching rules that an organization will put on their meetings. And often rules that people have for meetings, if you look at them, are things like show up on time and, always have an agenda and all of that. But when you go into places that have deep cultural ownership, you get rules like the 2 pizza rule, which is Amazon's rule for keeping meetings small. So that gives them sort of a young, fun, pizza-soaked kind of cultural connotation to what is a rule that essentially means no more than 8 people in this room, thank you. The law of 2 feet, right? That's the open source rule or open space rule that says, if you shouldn't be here, go away, right? You have you have the freedom and the autonomy to leave. We had a couple people earlier who were not feeling well. They exercised the law of 2 virtual feet, and that's totally wonderful. Brene Brown there is all about vulnerability in leadership. And some of her rules are to show up and rumble, right? So they've got a specialized meeting name called the Rumble. And the rule in the Rumble is that you show up fully authentic, fully vulnerable, and you take the issues on head on. Rules. So these performance criteria, these aren't rituals, right? Because they're just overarching names and ideas that we put on top of the whole system. Our whole approach is just soaked in this cultural context shifting idea. And then you get into the rituals themselves. So next on slide 4, rituals at work. So one of my 2 books I like for ritual design at work, one is literally rituals for work. It's not actually rainbow colored. My children drew on top of it with marker. So it's actually a black and white book, but that's what it looks like. And then there's also Daniel Coyle's Culture Code, which is stories of amazing cultures. And if you read Daniel Coyle's Culture Code, you will realize it is a book primarily about meetings. And they define rituals this way. So actions that a person or group does repeatedly following a similar pattern or script in which they've imbued symbolism and meaning. So rituals are things that we do that have a higher purpose or meaning beyond the activity itself. And there's the connection with what Norm is talking about.
The key to a really powerful ritual is imbuing it with the sense of symbol and meaning. It's carrying an energy of intentionality to it, and it's making that energy of intentionality conscious. Without that, you'll find a lot of rituals become mechanistic. Even rituals that are intended to enhance relationship, for example, a ritual of appreciation at the end of meetings. The intention of that is to acknowledge and appreciate and create this energy of it. But I've often been in those kinds of meetings where people go through the motions, the mechanization of the process without bringing forward that sense of meaning to it. And so meaning and symbols are a way of creating that meaning, is really critical to differentiating a ritual from just a pattern of behavior.
So, and on that front, there are a number of really cool, interesting research studies on the power of ritual to impact group performance and behavior. In fact, if those of you who were here last week when we talked to Allison from Harvard, I met Allison through her colleague Mike Norton, who is a ritual researcher. So we'll drop some of those things in the follow-up notes if you want to get all geeky with like, oh, this is exactly what those patterns are. And there are some tricks to how you introduce them and tricks to what they can include to make them even more powerful. But we're not going to go that deep today. What we're going to talk about today is what are the examples of things that people have done in the past and how might you go about identifying some for yourself. So if you move on to slide 5, there in meetings, the opportunities for introducing rituals primarily are at the start of meetings, in ways for keeping your meetings on track, at the end, and then in opportunities for nudging certain kinds of behavior. So starting at the beginning of the meeting, here are three simple examples. Some teams that are having trouble relating will introduce something like a rose and thorn go around at the beginning of the meeting, right? What's one thing that you liked and one thing you didn't like? They actually use this in classrooms too. So that's just a simple starting go around thing that makes everybody more human. Starbucks did something completely different. They begin their meetings with a coffee tasting. So, coffee tasting. A, it's related to their product, so they're connecting to their higher purpose. B, they are invoking the art of hosting, right? You walk in, somebody hands you a cup of coffee. How nice is that? And the RFS Financial, so they're a VC fund that focuses on social benefit, they begin their meetings with 5 minutes of silence. So they come in and they get centered on their larger purpose as an organization. Rituals for keeping on track. Who here has used or heard of the Elmo? Enough, let's move on. Yeah, quite a few, yeah. So that's a simple, basically it's like a code word, right? The meeting's going off track, somebody can say Elmo. There are other groups who use cards. So they pass out a deck of cards or in some other way rotate roles, just like that monkey reminder roll, and they take turns, right? So not only is the passing out of the roles part of the ritual, it's also an opportunity to get everybody involved and to get everybody trained up in leadership skills and sort of keep it funky fresh, right? Because it's not always Elise leading the show or Norman leading the show. Everybody's taking some turns that way. And then Heiligenfeld is one of my favorite examples. They use a bell. So when something in a meeting has gone wrong, whoever, and again, they also change the roles, is assigned to ring the bell, rings the bell, and everybody's quiet until the resonance dissipates and they figure out how to get that meeting back on track. So those are what I call yellow card rituals. I was calling them red card rituals because I thought it sounded cooler. But then people explained to me that if you get a red card, game's over. So that's not actually what's happening here. It's a yellow card. It's a warning. Right. Something's off. Let's get back into the game. Couple of rituals for nudging. The cactus. So I use that to represent something that I had learned from the SEALs. When they go into action reviews, they will often, so an action review is this meeting where you're going, okay, what happened in that last thing? What did we learn? What should we have done differently? It can be really, really intense. And there's a problem that you often encounter where people start to blame each other, right? You should have been there. You shouldn't have shot this thing. You should have hidden this way. So what they do is they take an object and they set it on the table and they say, okay, we are here to discuss the event. We're not here to discuss the people. We're going to discuss the thing that happened. It's not about you. It's not about you. It's about that. And they have this very explicit ritualistic way of externalizing the event so that they can, in fact, be as objective as possible when they're in this highly charged conversation. I already mentioned the monkey minder. This monkey is the whoops monkey, which is a ritual that is celebrated in some teams in Google, where at every couple of weeks they have a meeting where they assign the whoops monkey to the person who failed in the most spectacularly educational way in the last couple of weeks. So, and that person gets to hold the whoops monkey on their desk. It's their way of saying, you know what, hey, stuff happens, we fail, and our value is to fail and learn from it, not to shame each other from it. So they celebrate their failures with the whoops monkey. And then, what do you think the girl in the pink is all about? I had a really good idea for that one last night. Vibes watcher. That's what it is. I couldn't find a good picture for vibes. So she's got cool vibes. And the vibes watcher and the sharing of vibes, that's something they do at Lululemon or Lululemon. So at the beginning of their meetings, they'll go around and they'll talk about any vibes you've picked up, right? What are the vibes from this week? And what they're explicitly asking their team about is what's going on in the context that's impacting our work? And they're making it visible and they call it their vibes, right? So sometimes what they hear are things that are happening at home. Sometimes they're like, oh my God, elections, right? And they're dealing with that. And sometimes they're talking about, hey, I'm starting to notice customers really aren't liking that camo lion print thing. What do we do about that? So Vibes Watcher, all about nudging the larger context to create the relationships and the focus you're looking at. Finally, a couple of example, last slide, rituals for ending. The weather report. So looking at our time going forward, my prediction for my work week, as if it were weather, is that it's going to be stormy. Or, hey, I'm looking at clear skies and smooth sailing, right? Weather report. Really tactical activity-based one. Apple calls out the DRIs. And they have a cool acronym for it, but basically it means directly responsible individuals. Who are the people from this meeting who are going to take action now, next? DRI, roll call. And then, as Norm mentioned, appreciations, right? So go around the room. I would like to explicitly appreciate all of you who seem so very engaged and are taking notes and whatnot, to make you all feel like you should do that. That's my appreciation, just reinforces what I want to see happen activity-wise. So those are just some examples of ways in which people take and they do a tactical thing they need to get done, but they do it in a way that's got more meaning and is meant to shift that larger context. Before I send you off, so we've got another half an hour, and next what I would like to do is give you a copy of my workbook. It's an excerpt from a much larger workshop that I was running full day with teams. So it's got weird page numbers. It says it starts on page 30 or something. And I'll give you that and give you a chance to play with it for a little bit, and then send you back into breakouts to sort of explore how you might start to experiment with some of these things in your own environments. But before we do that, does anybody have questions, comments, or an example that they would like to share?
Elise, I was struck from an earlier conversation we had where you mentioned Brene Brown's Rumble, and how they created a certain ritual to create the space that allows for that. And it was, what did they call it? Give him permissions?
Yeah, so before they go, so the Rumble is the meeting, right? The name of their meeting. The performance criteria for all their meetings is they show up with authenticity and vulnerability. That's her deal. And the ritual going into a Rumble is that they get out sticky notes and they write permission slips to themselves. So they spend 4 or 5 minutes at the beginning of the meeting writing down, I give myself permission to, call a break if I need it, to, in this conversation, say if I need more time, right? I give myself permission to take a deep breath and think twice before I tell John what I really think, whatever it is that they need to do to stay in integrity in that call.
Well, what I loved about that example is it's a great example of how designing a ritual that supports the intention of the meeting. Right? So there's a ritual that facilitates people giving them safety or power over, if you will, so they can show up authentically and vulnerably. So it's a great example of creating the ritual for the intent of what you're trying to accomplish. I wanted to raise that as an example also.
So I'm going to encourage you. I put in a link to the workbook, and the page you're looking for it's not called page 32. It's the second to last page in that workbook. When you go there, it's basically giving you sort of the key questions to think through as you look at ritual design. So one of the overall goal, what are you trying to achieve with that ritual? So what activity is it accomplishing? What relationships are you creating? What context are you trying to shift? And then the trigger. So when does a ritual happen? right? What's going on in the environment to make that happen? Some of these rituals are every single ding dong meeting, and some of them are something's gone extra wrong. We need to get the special room and the cactus, right? And that's your trigger for that ritual. The action, so literally what happens. Now, one of the things that it wasn't super clear in those examples, but is true of most rituals, is that they have an element both of auditory engagement, but also physical engagement. Most rituals have a more physical component, and in the research, they find that the more complicated they are, the more meaning people tend to ascribe to them. That becomes a super duper special thing. And then finally, and here's the game changer for you as organization leaders, how do you include people in that ritual over time, right? So if we think back to what Allison talked about in the diversity call last week, for those of you who were there, she talked about the danger of inside talk, right? Inside talk excludes people, right? You've got a special language that makes other people feel like outsiders. Well, it also means if you have a special language and people know it, that makes them feel like insiders. So intentional inside talk that is trained and transmitted is an incredibly powerful driver of cultural unity. And one final note on this, in the organizations, when we look up that maturity scale that have these kinds of practices, the other thing that we see is they do in fact weed people out, right? Not because they're mean about it, but because when you have a strong culture, people either belong there, feel like they belong there, or they feel like they don't, right? It does tend to become self-limiting in some ways. So I'm seeing some questions in the chat, and go ahead and feel free to comment and ask anything too.
Sure, this is Rachel. What I was asking about is I really like what I'm hearing about these rituals and everything, but a lot of the meetings that I run are with kind of our stakeholders who are funding our projects. And I'm wondering if there are ways to introduce these things in those kinds of meetings, or if it's best not to. Because I've tried to introduce like a little bit more of the relationship building type things in meetings before, and basically was met with, let's cut to the chase and get the things done because I don't have time for this. And so I'm wondering if it's just not appropriate to do rituals in that context, and if we should just stick with our internal meetings, or if there's a better way to introduce them. If you have thoughts on that.
I think this is why Norman and I pair, right? Because what you're reflecting is that the larger context that you're in isn't supportive of that kind of culture, right? That kind of activity. In terms of introducing rituals, there are a couple of tips. I think they're appropriate in all contexts where you want to create that kind of a spirit. But you do need the context to support your ability to create that kind of spirit, right? Like, so if your organization is like, yeah, we don't care about how people feel and how they relate, and you're all a lone shark on that, you're going to be in trouble. If, however, you can get the support for shifting that context in with the groups around you, that one of the keys is you don't say, okay, let's do a new ritual now, right? you say, hey, here's something kind of special we want to try, because we want to achieve, want to make sure that we're all staying in. I think you're at the VA, is that right, Rachel? Right. So our larger mission is to make sure we provide excellent care and keep in mind the health and well-being of our veterans. And to begin today's call, I want to take a moment to, do whatever it is you're going to do that helps connect to that higher purpose and starts to share those stories. So you start to shift the context by introducing it as a practice with purpose. And then the next time they can start to share a little bit more and share a little bit more. So most rituals are organic in a way, like people think they sort of sprang up, like Notre Dame's famous, right? The Notre Dame football team has a poster on the wall of, and they all, as they go out to every game, they touch the poster for good luck. Now, who knows when that came up, right? And they always walk the same path to get to the game. But over time, that has become their ritual, their success ritual to get there. You can introduce these things, but you don't introduce them by like saying that's what you're going to do. You introduce them by trying some things and seeing which ones effectively stick and shift the culture. Did that?
I think I'd like to add on to that and sort of address Sue's question about who creates the ritual. Does the leader create it or does the group create it? And it piggybacks on what Elise just said. Rituals have to be meaningful to the group. And so even when you're dealing with, like I've sat on public company boards and found them, as you point out, Rachel, just focused on, okay, we're here, we got 3 hours, we got to get it done, let's get over with it. But I've introduced ways for them to, as Elise said, why are we here? Why are we even talking about this activity? And created some rituals around connecting with our higher purpose or connecting with the culture or the tone at the top was the term we used. What is the tone and how do we as a board know it exists? So we created some ways of stopping the activity and focusing on sensing into what's going on in the organization. So there's all sorts of ways to create it, but it has to be meaningful to the group. And so I often encourage the leader to introduce the underlying reason for wanting to create the ritual and have the group decide what kind of, how do we start it? Do we ring a bell or do we bring in a cactus plant or what would make it meaningful to this group? And to Lisa's point, after a while, the ritual just becomes so ingrained in the context of the organization. 20 years later, they're still touching the picture and going out to the field a certain way. And sometimes you have to re-imbue why we're doing that because it can just become a mechanistic activity without the meaning behind it.
Tom.
Yeah, I was just going to say, because I was thinking about Rachel's situation of dealing with stakeholders. If I come in early, like I'm an outside facilitator, so usually I'm working with a group. They don't know me. I have no credibility with them right away. And if I think they're not into any of that stuff, I don't start with that stuff. So what I try to do is play the way they want to play for a while, and then hopefully they get comfortable with me, and I build a little credibility. And then when I think they're ready, then I might say, hey, would you be open to? And then they're more willing to give it a whirl rather than your first reaction, which you get is like, I don't have time for this, because that's, right out of the block.
All right. I'm going to send you off to talk about some of these ideas and how you might apply them in your space and where your questions still sit, because this is a, 25, 30-minute introduction to like kind of heady, deep, complicated stuff. Any final questions before you get a chance to talk to some other smarter people beyond us? Okay, so in your small groups, if you had a chance to do any thinking on this, and I know you really haven't, but to the best of your ability, take turns sharing some ideas that you might have or some examples from your past about a meeting ritual that you found useful or one that you would like to find useful. And after each person shares, go ahead and talk about, something that you specifically like in what they're sharing, and one thing that you might like to see more of, or that you see as an opportunity. So give each other some support and some thought that way. It says 15 minutes. Yeah, sure. Why don't we do it? You got 15 minutes. That'll be perfect. You can really get deep on this. And if you need us, go ahead and call us back and we will come and help you. Okay. Enjoy your conversations. Welcome back, everybody. Okay, 15 minutes is kind of a long breakout. Too short, too long, just right? Tell me. Experiment number 1.
I loved it.
We could have kept going.
Yeah.
We could have too.
Same here. Yeah.
It was great. We had 3 people, but 2 people were kind of talking mostly. And I felt like in my previous breakout, we didn't have enough time. So it was great. It was a great time to share.
Excellent. So in terms of debriefing on this one, 3 words. If you were going to put in the chat 3 words, how would you summarize that conversation? All right. Learning, sharing, understanding. Got good ideas. I love when the 3 words make a sentence. How fun. Nice. Just do it. Oh, fun. Full of information. Meaningful, reflective, helpful, wonderful, interesting.
New insight.
Nice. So, what did anybody have something come up in their conversation that they thought really added some aha for that would be good to share with the rest of the group?
I was in a conversation with 3 gents. Sorry guys, can't remember all your names. But Jose, Jose said something quite profound actually. Jose, I hope you don't mind me saying this because I think it really landed, and it was about with some of these rituals. Sometimes he said he doesn't give it the importance. It's not about labeling it and giving an aha moment. It's just doing it quietly and just seeing how it works without giving it the lift to make everyone feel like, okay, this is something new we're trying. And I really love that. It's kind of subtle and very safe from an experimentation perspective.
Excellent. Dave, did you have?
Weirdly, I was going to talk about that insight from Jose as well, because I thought it was a powerful one. It was I would have framed it as don't oversell the ritual, because suddenly people can start feeling icky about the whole thing, like it feels artificial if you've oversold it.
Yeah, good. That brings up a quick, I didn't want to share this, but I'm going to, a quick research study. So Mike Norton, who does the research on rituals, decided to see if creating a very complex ritual increased team bonding, because they were working in an environment where the managers and the teams were kind of at each other all the time. And so they created this sort of involved ritual for that. And in some teams, it did, in fact, create the result they were looking for. And in other teams, it also created the result they were looking for, in that the team bonded over how very much they hated the ritual. So it will bring people together. Just hold on to that. Any last comments about your breakout before we just do our final wrap up for today? All right. So for this last bit, what we're going to do is basically, for those of you who have done liberating structured groups events, we're going to use Chatterfall, kind of a Mad Tea Chatterfall. And the way this one works is I'm going to put a question in the chat, and everybody will type their answers and then show me a thumbs up. And then I will, when I see your thumbs up, we'll say go, and then you'll hit return. So don't hit return. So go ahead and type your answer, but don't hit submit until I say go, and then we'll submit them all at once. Questions about the process? Okay.
Elise, I don't have a question. I just want to say I use this when I want to create a level playing field, when there's some members in the team that are much more influential and I'm afraid others will repeat their answers. So I love the idea of not hitting return until everyone's typed something in.
Yeah. So it works really well for that. It's also just kind of fun to see everything flood in at once. So in both of those scenarios, it's a useful technique. So our first calm tea chatterfall question is, or basically complete the sentence. An idea or moment that stood out for me. An idea or moment that stood out for me from Norm's talk, from the examples, from your breakouts, from the entirety of our time together. Tom's in. Okay. Key and Mark and Nikki. And many, many others. All right, we're going to call that one and go. Ooh. Focus on relationship. Teams as persona. Thinking about what to name things. Isn't that fun? Oh, so many great things here.
Yeah. Wow.
Ah, excellent. Now, Jose says the second breakout was special. I think we heard that in the comments of your cohort. All right, next question. Oh, I just pasted it into my other document. That won't help at all. One thing I'm not sure about. One thing I'm not sure about. All right, Key and Tom and Tessie and Dave. Nan and Rachel. Nancy. All right. And go. Which rituals will work? How to get everyone on the, which one to choose? Yes, super hard. How to keep them from getting stale. How to talk about the need for more ritual. Yeah, that's crazy hard, right? Sustainability. And one of the things about rituals is they don't always have to be sustainable. Sometimes they might need to shift over time, and that's okay too. How to help raise awareness. Excellent.
Yeah,
okay.
There's been a number of questions about applying context and understanding context more, which are fully understand that you'd want to know more. And I think that's great. We'll talk about that in a second.
Well, and actually we are down to our last few seconds. And one of the things Norman and I were talking about is how like this stuff is so, it's days and months worth of content, and we're doing it in 90 minutes. So one of the questions and the final question we have for you in our Mad Tea is, going forward, I would like to right. Dave and Mark and Maria and Nikki and Key and Nan and Rachel, Nancy.
And
all right.
Okay.
Tom, Sue. All right, go. Whew. Be intentional. Apply this in real work. Wouldn't that be fun?
Yeah.
Test and experiment. That's the way, right? That's the way. Practice creating a ritual. I hope if you have questions about that workout, please, or that workbook, go ahead and holler at me, because there are all kinds of ideas in there. Share the concept with our board. Excellent. Excellent. All right. And then Rachel says she needs to run to another meeting because it is exactly time. So thank you, everybody, for all of this. We will hang out for just a couple more minutes to say hi. But for those of you, thank you so much for contributing. I hope you found this interesting and useful. And, holler if you've got other questions or follow-up from both of us.
Thank you, Norman. Thank you, Elise.
Okay. Oh, you're very welcome. My pleasure.
Thank you both.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye. Thanks. That was great.